Hi there, my name is Amanda and this is going to be my Pan Those Eyeshadows March update. I had filmed my previous update in February and you can go ahead and check that out. I'll either link it down below or up in the cards. And if you want to keep up with this project with me on Instagram, you can follow me at Use It Up Makeup. I also post things like makeup of the days and empties and things like that, just things related to makeup and using your makeup. And if you're interested, you can check me out there. One of the things I have to talk about is that I added new eyeshadows to my collection. This is before the stores started closing. This particular eyeshadow palette has been on my mind for a few months, and especially as people have started posting more about it, I just got sucked in, and I'm 3 or 4 years late, but I got the Too Faced Sweet Peach palette. Everybody knows what this looks like, but every time, every time I open this palette, the smell reminds me of my childhood. That's just a little added bonus. It just reminds me of childhood and it makes me happy, but I'm really excited to start using this and I'm happy that it's in my collection. And I also added one more single shadow to my collection. When I bought this palette, I also bought a ColourPop Super Shock shadow in the shade Like a Shot, just a pretty lid shade, and I haven't dipped into it yet. I love eyeshadow and I'm happy to have it in my collection, but I've decided that with these purchases that I am going to go on an eyeshadow no-buy. So that was one of the things I wanted to get out of the way. The other thing that I wanted to add to this project is a new rule for myself. One of my previous rules was that if I hit pan in an eyeshadow palette that I was focusing on, but it wasn't necessarily the shade that I was focusing on, I had the opportunity to roll out that palette for something different. This is kind of like an added rule to kind of go off of that. But I've decided that if an eyeshadow that I'm focusing on is within this project and I either am not interested in using it or have not used it in 4 weeks, so in a month, I've decided that I can roll that eyeshadow out. But other than that, if you are interested in seeing my panning progress, go ahead and keep on watching. Alright, so I'm not going to go in any particular order, but the first palette that I wanted to talk about is my Rearranged Yes Please palette. And the shade that I had rolled in is the shade Big Cocktails. And it is this shade right here, which will not look any different at all because I did not use it at all. Once I posted my Pan Those Eyeshadows video, I noticed that this shade was in my project for 5 weeks and I did not use it once. So that's when I came up with my rule to roll out a shade or a palette that I just, for whatever reason, for the month was not interested in. I did roll a new shadow into its place, so this palette was rolled out. One of the shades that I was focusing on came from my Tartelette in Bloom palette, and the shade that I was focusing on was Rebel. It did have a small dent starting to form in the corner. This is the shade now. So you can see a little itty bitty pan going on in the corner, and I decided that I wasn't going to get any progress with a deep shade like this if I kept using a fluffy brush. So I decided to use a detail brush, and I was mostly focusing on kind of shaping my outer corner and then blending it with a fluffy brush. And I liked that my looks came out a little more, they weren't as messy, they looked more put together, and I really liked that. In the process of being more detailed with my eyeshadow looks, I did end up hitting pan in this shade, so I'm really happy that I did roll this out. As I mentioned in my last video, I am not waiting to roll in new shadows because I do post updates on Instagram, and that is where I mostly document my progress with my projects. I did roll in a new shade for this shade, but this was in the project for, I think it was over 6 weeks. It was in for a while, but once I started using the detail brush, the shades started going a little bit quicker. Even though I love this palette, I'm happy that that darker shade got moved out. The next shade that I was working on came from my ABH Sultry palette, and the shade was Cyborg. This one was also starting to form a little bit of a dip in the corner, but I was not using it very consistently. But once I hit pan in Rebel, I was starting to focus more on this cool toned shade, and you can see a little itty bitty pan in the corner there. This is a pretty particular shade, so it is more unique in my collection, and I felt like I needed to create very similar looks with it. It wasn't something that I felt like I could use in the inner corner or as a highlight in any way. I just created pretty much similar looks with this palette a few times, and that's how I ended up hitting pan. Since this palette is already being talked about, I also hit bonus pan in the shade Fresh. You can see that little itty bitty baby pan in the corner there. So in total I have 3 pans in this palette now. This is probably the most loved palette in terms of pans now in my collection, and rightfully so. This is one of my favorite palettes. That's all of the pans that I'll be showing in this video. So I did hit 3 pans this month, 2 focus shadows and 1 bonus pan. Even if it's just 3 pans, I do anticipate that I will continue to make progress on my shades. I'm excited to see which palettes are going to be showing pan next. The next palette that I was working on was my ColourPop Blush Crush palette. It's a beautiful pinky palette. This is the palette that I'm wearing on my eyes today. And the shade that I was focusing on was Blush Crush. And there was a little bit of a dip starting to form in my last update. You can't really see, but there is a little bit of a dip starting to deepen. This palette is starting to look like it is getting used now, so that's really exciting. This shade is pretty powdery, so hence the mess on the palette, but I thought that because this shade was very powdery that I would hit pan in it a lot quicker. This is a shade that's pretty, it requires a very particular look, so like this kind of look today, not something I would wear all the time. With it being a particular shade, and even though it is kind of powdery, I don't think I'm going to hit pan in it very soon. I think I would actually hit pan in something else in this palette before I hit pan in that. Either way, it's fun to use pinks, and especially if I am just staying home. So this palette is starting to get a little bit more use, and I'm excited. The next shade that I was focusing on came from my ColourPop Flutterby palette, and it is the shade Lush, which is just a beautiful transition, and I've only used it a couple times, so there's not a lot of progress to see, and especially because this shade doesn't require a dense brush, it requires a fluffy brush, so this shade's not going to go anywhere. I think if anything I will hit pan in one of these shimmers first. Like I've mentioned in my previous video, my main focus is to have pan in every palette. Even if I don't hit pan in my focus shade, if I hit pan in something else, that's still a win for me. And the last shade that I was working on originally came from my ColourPop Going Coconuts palette, and the shade that I was working on was that middle shade called Cocoa Crush. It had a little bit of a dent forming a little bit of a bigger dent, but still a smaller dent. I just haven't been thinking about this palette as much, and I think it's because I know I like this palette and I know it will get use. So I'm trying to use those shades that are like this, that are a little more particular. This isn't one of those shades. This is a good everyday shade. So I think I'm trying to focus on those more unique shades just to roll them out so that I can wear shades like this like out and about, or to my internship, to my work. So I think that's why it's been taking a back seat, but its time will come. I know that for sure. Alright, so the next shadows that I have been working on, they were rolled into the project already. And the first shade that I rolled in was to replace Big Cocktails from the Yes Please palette by ColourPop. And the shadow that I rolled in came from my Soft Glam palette, and it's the shade Glistening. There was a small dent in it first, but you'll be able to see there's a bigger dent going on in there. I think this is the shade that I'm going to hit pan on next, or at least the next focus shade. I have been using this a lot with Orange Soda, Burnt Orange, and Sienna, and Burnt Orange and Sienna are also starting to get really good dips. So I think I'm not even going to hit pan in Glistening first. I think I'm going to hit pan in one of those. But if that happens, I still want to keep focusing on Glistening, and I want to get that rolled out, even though that is one of my favorite shades in this palette, and it's one of my favorite gold shades overall. I just want to get use out of like this particular palette too, because this is an older, slightly older palette. I know that the ABH formula is infamous for going bad quicker, so I do want to hit pan and finish up these shades in particular. The next shade that I rolled in was to replace Rebel from the Tartelette and Bloom palette, and the shade that I rolled in came from the Jaclyn Hill palette. It's in the shade Little Lady, which is this pinkier shade over here, and when you swatch it, it comes off with like a little bit of a peachier undertone, but on the eyes that I've noticed, I've only used it once, but on the eyes that I have noticed, it does not come off as peachy. It still comes off pink, so it still works with like reddish tones, those kind of warmer tones, so happy about that. I thought it would be a little bit more of a trickier shade to work with, but I'm happy to have this palette in the project again, and I want to start seeing pans in these 35 shades. And the last shade that I rolled in was when I hit pan in Cyborg in the Sultry palette, and I rolled in my very brand new Sweet Peach palette, and the shade that I rolled in I have not used at all, and it is the shade Cobbler. So it is this kind of like neutral lid shade. Haven't used it at all. I'm hoping that my Soft Glam palette, my Blush Crush palette, and I think my Jaclyn Hill palette, I'm hoping those are the next shades that I'm going to be hitting pan in and starting to roll out, so that I can start to focus on some of my newer palettes a little bit more. Blush Crush, I think Blush Crush has been in the project a little bit longer now, and with these pinky shades, I mean, it's very fun for spring, but I am starting to lean more towards like the purpley mauvey tones. I'm preferring those for springtime, so I do want to use my Flutterby palette more. I almost totally forgot swatches, but this is the color story that I will be working with for March and April. I want to roll this shade out since it's been in the project the longest, and then I also want to work on Glistening because I think I'm pretty close to hitting pan. I also want to focus on Little Lady a little bit more, maybe see, I haven't paired Little Lady with Blush Crush at all yet, so maybe that would be a good pairing. So with those pans, I now have 20 pans in my collection. And also with those 20 pans and with adding new eyeshadows to my collection, I have hit pan in 7.8% of my collection now. I didn't really have an official goal that I was working on in terms of pan percentage, but I was kind of thinking if I hit pan in 7.5 to 10% of my collection, that would be really exciting and really cool. So I've surpassed that first initial goal for myself. And if I hit pan in 26 eyeshadows, that's hitting pan in 10%. And I'm only 6 shadows away, so if I hit pan in all 6 of these eyeshadows, that would make the 10% goal, which would be really, really kind of awesome. Maybe after that I could make an official goal for myself about hitting pan in maybe 12% or 15%, however crazy I want to get. But I'm excited that my collection is starting to show that I have pan, and now I only have 4 out of my 18 palettes that are not showing pan, so I'm slowly but surely getting there. If you want to continue to keep up with the project and see which shades I'm rolling in as I roll them in, you can follow me on my Instagram, or if you want to keep up with the project here on YouTube, go ahead and subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you are keeping yourself healthy and keeping yourself busy, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye.